I'll say that one more time because I know it's not in my slides there. God gives us unconventional victory when we fall to our knees and are obedient to His unconventional direction. You know, that's a doozy of a sentence there. All right, who here likes sports?
Me.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, good for you guys. Who here knows enough about golf to know who Tiger Woods is? Tiger Woods. Debatably one of the best golfers to ever walk the earth. Yeah? Some may. No? Who we got? Who else? Phil? Ah.
Happy.
He's in that. Happy Gilmore. Now that's something I might be able to give you. Actually, I saw that on TV earlier today, and I was tempted to watch it, but I didn't. I watched a Christmas movie instead, which was not what I wanted at all. But my wife was like, she's ever since after Halloween, she's like, Christmas. Whenever I ride in her car, it's always on the 105.7 or whatever, and it's just Christmas, and I'm already getting annoyed, and it's not even Thanksgiving. So if you're like that, we'll have an altar call for you guys after the service, because I just can't. But yeah, so in 2008, one of the most unforgettable sporting victories ever took place. Tiger Woods, who most of you guys know, had won 13 major golf victories with countless other tournaments. The 2008 US Open Championship ultimately ended with an 18-hole playoff on the 5th day. So keep in mind, these tournaments, they kind of go a week long. So Monday through Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they kind of do practice rounds to get a good feel of, how the ball is playing on the course and the spin and what the weather's going to be like, whatever the case is. So at 5 days, you're at Sunday, so Wednesday through Sunday, that's 5. At the 5th day, they would have played 72 holes going up to that 5th day. So 4 days in, 72 holes. The 5th day ended up being a 18-hole playoff, obviously at the tournament, was one of the most incredible wins for Tiger. This marked his 14th major victory in an unbelievable fashion, but that's not all there is to the story. 3 weeks prior to the US Open, Tiger actually suffered several stress fractures in his left knee, and that's the one that takes all the torque. So if you're golfing, it's your front one right here if you're right-handed, and it takes all the torque, which you can imagine, a pro golf player having a lot of torque with his swing and whatnot. So that would obviously damage his swing on any circumstance, not just, whether it's irons, whether it's wedges, whether it's driver, whatever the case is. It damages your swing pretty good if you don't have that stable. So, and his doctors actually recommend he let that heal before playing, but as we already know, Tiger won, so Tiger ignored the doctors because he believed he was going to win. Those who actually watched the tournament, they saw Tiger on TV wince in pain many times as he hit poor shots, and then recover with ones that no one else could match. Now, I know when I was a little bit younger, really into golf, I used to watch like unbelievable golf plays, and I'm sure you guys probably do this with video games or other sporting events on YouTube. I just look up crazy golf shots, and a lot of them would be Tiger Woods. So he can recover from pretty much anywhere on the course, which I always admired, and I thought that was pretty cool. So. There were even times where he fell to the ground, and this is when, he was playing in that tournament with his stress fractures, fell to the ground after a shot in pain. His rounds were up and down, but he managed to tie for the lead after the 4 rounds were completed. And again, that's 72 holes. So think about being injured, not being able to walk super great, walking 18 holes a day, and they don't get golf carts like you might get, if you just went to go play golf. They have to walk all of them, uphill, downhill, gravel, whatever the case is. So I can imagine after 72 holes with, stress fractures in my left knee, I'd probably be pretty tired and not in a good headspace, right? So he managed to tie after the 4 rounds. He went on to play 18 more the next day on a one-on-one playoff and win. So that's 90 holes altogether. 90 holes of miles and miles of walking while having stress fractures in his left knee. It was only later that the public actually found out that he had stress fractures that would heal in time. However, he actually tore his ACL in his left knee. So, who here has torn their No one? Thank goodness. I know a lot of people, and that can be a devastating injury that can be months and months and months of comeback for it. So, yeah, he tore his left knee, but he still won. Now, he ended up having reconstructive knee surgery and didn't swing a club for 6 months, which, again, if you can imagine not doing something that you were pretty much born to do for 6 months, that can be pretty hard mentally as well, right? Now, through pain, physical limitations, and something that other people probably couldn't mentally have done, this victory was the most improbable of his career. Now, my whole point being is that victories don't ever look the same and sometimes come in the most unexpected and unconventional ways. There's going to be times that God leads us into seasons or opportunities that we never expected with outcomes we never saw coming. Our victories require us to hear from God and rely on Him for direction, even if it seems a little unconventional. Now this leads right into my point number 1. Victory requires falling. Sweet, that's cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to Joshua 5. If you guys want to go in your Bibles to Joshua 5, I'm going to be reading verses 13 through 15. I'll give you guys a second to get there. Joshua 5, 13 through 15. You good? Very good. All right. 13 through 15. This is kind of in the start of the fall of Jericho here. So, now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Throw back. Think for a moment, all that Joshua had experienced being Moses' assistant, where they had gone, what they had seen, the abundance of faith in moments of serious defeat. Now he has crossed the Jordan River to set foot on the land that God had promised. An entire generation had to die before Joshua and the people of Israel could be where they're at, the edge of something miraculous. Now thinking presently from this verse right here, Joshua's feet were actually on the soil that God had promised. He stared at the first battle that stood in the way of the promises that God had spoken for generations. They were there to see it, and they had just crossed over a river by a miracle only God could provide. Now I can imagine Joshua was wondering whether anything would come easy or if it was always going to be a struggle. As he stared at the wall of Jericho, God sent a messenger, the commander of the Lord's army, with God's instructions. And what's the first thing Joshua does? I just read it. What's the first thing he does? He falls. What else? Finish it. He falls to his knees with his face to the ground. I'll take it. Awesome. Joshua wasn't new to hearing from God, yet his fear, wonder, amazement, and reverence consumed him. He was the leader of over 1 million people, but he humbled himself to fall to his knees because he understood that God's voice, His direction, and His leading were required to see the victory ahead. Now, I'm going to read another verse. This is going to be in Exodus 33, 8 to 11. I'll give you guys a second to get there. Everybody good? No. No? Okay. No. Okay, sorry. I'll give you some more time.
Okay.
Good? All right.
Oh, we're not yet.
Nope.
No idea there.
I feel like a teacher being a professor right now or something, trying to go through my notes and making sure everybody has all the bullet points down. Close.
Close, very close.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Good? All right. Exodus 33, 8 to 11. And whenever Moses went out of the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to the tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance, while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance of their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. See, Joshua understood that his victory required time on his knees, even if it meant staying longer than anyone else, or if it became uncomfortable and no one else was doing it. We don't see Joshua question the directions from the angel. He understood that even though they may be unconventional and out of the ordinary, he wouldn't see victory without following them. Now, God is going to ask you to do things that he isn't going to ask anyone else. He's going to direct you to places where others aren't going. He may have promises for you that no one else has heard yet. In all of these, we can either sit back and just hope they take place, or we can spend time on our knees in his presence, listening to his voice, and believing when he speaks, it will happen. When is the last time we stayed longer than anyone else? When was the last time we fell to our knees in his presence to hear his leading and direction for our life? We may see defeat, but if we fall to our knees and follow his direction, then we will experience the unconventional victories he has written for each of our stories. When we have the word, the direction, and the leading, then we must step out in obedience even if no one else is willing to. And this brings me to my point number 2. Victory requires obedience. Who remembers point number 1? Xander, victory requires following. Very good. This is point number 2. Victory requires obedience. Now, this is going to be one of the last times I read verses, but this is going to be a little bit longer. This is going to be Joshua 6. I know, turning back and forth between a couple of different places. Joshua 6, I'm going to read verse 1 through 20. You guys can bear with me.
You said 20?
1 through 20, that's right. So we'll be here for another half hour or so. We'll see how good my reading skills are. I'll tell you what, reading out loud is a lot different than reading like to yourself in your head. Reading out loud causes your mouth to dry up and all sorts of stuff. So again, bear with me. What was that?
No, we get some water.
No, it's okay. I'll deal with it. All right, we good? Joshua 6? Sweet. Sounds good. All right, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets. 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear the sound, a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant to the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of him." And he ordered the army to advance. March around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets, if you guys can't tell, this is going to be a little repetitive, right? So bear with me, a lot of 7s here. So let's see, where was I? The armed guard marched ahead. Okay, blew the trumpets. Here we go. Verse number 9 or 10. Let's go to 9. The armed guard marched ahead of the priest who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time, the trumpets were sounding. But Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling once. Then the army returned to the camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord, blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead with them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except on that day, they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priests surrounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who were with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord, must go into his treasury." When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took over the city. Whew. I feel like it just worked out or something. My goodness. So I read all that because I wanted to go over this. So no army had ever won a battle like this before, and it seemed crazy even now. It's mind-blowing that an army can march around a city for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, walk around it 7 more times, blow the trumpets, and shout, and capture the city. If you do all those things in this order and in that way, then you will win. Can you imagine getting those directions from an angel? Keep in mind that this wall was so big, people's homes were built into it, and they raced chariots on top of it. Now, these directions from the angel were very, very unconventional and not typical strategy for a battle. Joshua wasn't worried about what others thought of him, or if it had ever been done before. His desire was to be obedient to God no matter what. For him, it wasn't about the soldiers, families, kids, methods, pride, or anything else, but simply hearing from God and doing what he had directed him to. When Joshua and the people stepped out and obeyed, it allowed God to do the rest. Their obedience led to the victory and ultimately led to them receiving God's promises, his favor, and what he had spoken to the Israelites for generations. If you guys are taking notes, make sure to bullet point this one right here. For God, obedience is greater than any sacrifice we can make. For God, obedience is greater than any sacrifice we can make. Now, this is going to be the last verse I read for the night. I know, a lot of reading. We're going to go to 1 Samuel 15. 1 Samuel 15. I'll give you guys a second to get there. And it's going to be verses 20 through 22. I know you guys are there. There? Yeah, that was your quickest time. Very good. Thumbs up, we're good?
Hold on.
Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, I'll go slower.
1 Samuel 15, 20 through 22.
Got it.
Good? Awesome. All right, well now I have to find it, all right? Here we go. 1 Samuel 15, 20 through 22. But I did obey the Lord, Saul said. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. But Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. So again, this is kind of going over what I just had said. For God, obedience is greater than any sacrifice we can make, right? We may not offer burnt offerings and sacrifices anymore, but we have our lives, our time, our talents, our relationships, our hobbies, and many other things that can get in the way of being obedient to God. I think we can all agree to that. In the Old Testament, sacrifice was critical to them being right with God and their sins being set aside. God didn't say that sacrifice is worth nothing, but that obedience is of greater value than sacrifice. Joshua knew their obedience would lead to their victory, and ours will too. Now I'm going to tell you guys a little story about myself and coming right out of high school. I got saved, September 23rd of 2013. So, a long time ago, and for those of you who are trying to date me, I'm only 27 years old, okay?
Whoa.
And some may call me Gary because I might act old sometimes, but my name's Jarett, and I'm 27, and I'm young. Right, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm young. But in reality, like, I've been sleeping in a hotel bed for the last month, and I'm feeling like Gary right now, you know what I'm saying? My back, my body, whew. I need to go to the chiropractor a couple times a day, if you know what I'm saying. My goodness.
They're young.
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you guys a story here. It was right after high school. I was super on fire for God, and a lot of my friends moved away from college, and you guys are probably going to experience that soon here. At that time, I was doing a semester at KBCC until I went to Grand Valley in 2016. And at that time, I actually had a mentor or a leader. And for those of you who don't have a leader or mentor in your life, I highly recommend getting one. Somebody you can trust at all times. Somebody that you can go to anytime and they can be real with you. Call you out if you're not doing things you should be doing, and call you out if you're doing things you shouldn't be doing, right? Highly recommend it, even if it's one or two people in your life. I really, really, really want you guys to get a leader or a mentor. There you go. At that time, I had a leader and mentor. His name was Nick. I looked up to, well, physically I looked down to him because he was like 6'5" or something like that. But I had a mentor. I looked up to him as far as his relationship with the Lord. And we met up regularly and we did, Bible studies and whatnot, kind of going over what we had been reading, what we had been hearing from God. And I told him I really wanted to go out and evangelize. And we made a plan, and that's exactly what we ended up doing. Our plan was to go to Western Michigan University. You guys know where that's at, right? Yeah. Over there in Kalamazoo. Okay, pretty spread out campus. Our plan was to go there and just chat with college kids about, how their day is going, what they believe in, general stuff, just open chat to kind of see what they were thinking as far as who God is in their lives. So we planned to do this on Saturdays for a few months. Sometimes I would lead the conversations, sometimes he would lead the conversations, and when he led the conversations, he would try to actually grab their contact information, if it was just a phone number or an email, just some way to stay in contact with them, just in case they wanted to learn more about what we were talking about and maybe even come to a service or whatever the case was there. And I'll get to that point later. But after chatting with about 100 or so college kids, I was beginning to get a little bit discouraged because I didn't feel like what we were doing was making a difference or even doing what God really wanted us or called us to do. Now, it got to a point where Saturdays would come and I would try to make any excuses not to join Nick. Now, I know you guys have never, I'm the only one I know. You guys have never planned something and then when that day comes, you're like, oh, I don't really want to go, and try to make any excuses that you guys possibly can. Like, oh, my mom wants me to clean my room, do the dishes, take out the trash, walk my fish, whatever the case is. I know that you guys don't do that, right? I'm the only one? Okay, yeah. So I really wanted to be honest with him, and so I talked to him. I said, hey, I really don't feel like what we're doing is making a difference. And his response, and I'll remember this forever, because he's a very blunt person. You guys know of anybody in the room that's super blunt? No one? No one, really? Any high school boys in here? Or girls, maybe? No? All right. He said, Jarett, we've talked to at least 100 kids, and some never really heard about Jesus at all, and most have never been to church. We talked to atheists, agnostic, witchcraft, Catholic, Muslims, and many didn't believe one way or another. Were you expecting everyone to give their life to the Lord? And I took that pretty personal. I was like, well, kinda, that was my hope. That's why I thought we were doing this. Now, after Nick said that, I really started realizing that I'm not in control of what happens after the initial conversation, but it was just more so for planting a seed for God to work. However, I was in control of being obedient to what God has called us to do. Now, years later, this is years and years later, so this would have been 5 years later, minimum, Nick and I reconnected, and let's see. There we go. Yeah, we reconnected, and he actually mentioned when we used to go to Western and evangelize about our glory days, about me being kind of discouraged and whatnot. And he actually let me know, and he didn't tell me this until we reconnected, which I thought was kind of rude. However, he wanted to let me know that 4 kids from Western ended up giving their life to the Lord after our initial conversation way back in 2016. Now, my whole point being from that story is God is going to call you to do things that He might not call others to do. Even if you're excited and on fire when you start, you may have doubts or worries partway through the calling. However, being obedient to God is more important than you being uncomfortable or having doubts. Being obedient to God, no matter the situation, is always most important. Let me say that one more time because I really want you guys to understand that. Being obedient to God is more important than you being uncomfortable or having doubts. Being obedient to God, no matter the situation, is always most important. Many times in our culture, we weigh the cost of our sacrifices rather than just obeying. Looking at Joshua in the account of what happened at Jericho, we can see that in these unconventional times, especially in these unconventional times, it's critical that we are obedient no matter what it might cost. We have missionaries, pastors, family members, and people around us who have poured spiritual help into us, empowered us, and sacrificed so much just so that we can know Jesus. Our lives have been impacted by promises of God because someone was willing to give up something, maybe even everything, to be obedient. So what are we supposed to do? Who are we supposed to lead? What do we need to give up in order to be obedient to God's voice and His leading? These are things today that we can do and be obedient to. There are things and there are lives that we will impact because of the obedience to God. Now, again, this is something that I really want you guys to understand and write down if you guys are taking notes. Obedience isn't something we can pause on or wait on. It's not optional. The amazing part is, when we act in obedience, God takes over and does things through us that we could never do on our own. And I'll say that one more time, just in case you guys aren't taking notes. Obedience isn't something we can pause or wait on. It's not optional. The amazing part is, when we act in obedience, God takes over and does things through us that we could never do on our own. The worship team wants to come up. There are so many things that God has planned for each of us. He has literally written victory into your life no matter what lack, defeat, hurt, or frustration you have or will experience. His plan is good. He's just waiting for a generation to rise up, your generation to rise up, fall on their knees in His presence, and step out in unconventional victory. Now, everybody can stand up. I'm going to ask you guys to bow your heads. Who here has a hard time being obedient to God all the time? Raise your hands for me. Who here has a difficult time with what God has called you to do? Who here wants to fully be obedient to God all the time, especially with what He has called you to do? for this room of amazing individuals. Thank you for the time that we had to worship and praise you. I pray for everyone in this room that we just yearn for more of who you are and who you will always be. We continue to want everything you have laid out for us, and I pray for our hearts and minds and everything in us to be obedient to you and your word. I pray that we hear your calling on our lives and we stay obedient to that all the way through, that in the end we get to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, because we were obedient in all the things, King of Kings. Thank you, Lord, for who you are and who you always